been in Israel now for approximately
nearly 15 years.
Nearly 15 years. And he's one of the rabbis that, when he first came to Israel, was being asked by the chief rabbi at the time if he would like to become the chief rabbi of Israel. And he responded that he didn't want to have anything to do with political, because chief rabbi in Israel was a little bit of a political position. He didn't want to get involved. And he's a person who's been very modest all these years, but he's working on about 6 different books that he's going to
people. The real question is, which way is humanity going? I mean, whether any spiritual message, whether human beings are going to be capable of listening to a spiritual message, I think. And there again, I think that we're on the eve of great developments in human thought. I think that we've had 200, 300, 400 years of very crass materialism. And I think we may be on the eve of great changes in the way people think about things.
For instance, what do you see that makes you think that way?
Well, what do people think today? I mean, the philosophers, they go on chewing over very old problems, right? Which Plato raised, other people raised. But the scientists are doing a lot of thinking today. And I think they're the leading edge of human thought. And I think that they're beginning more and more to see that the world is not the materialistic thing people thought it was. Science was always very closely associated with materialism. That means that since Newton, everyone, when Newton discovered the law of gravitation, so he saw the planets as huge billiard balls, and people said, oh, now everything can be explained as billiard balls, atoms, particles, everything. And it's just a question of one ball hitting the other, and everything. Laplace said that if you knew the position and velocity of every particle, you could predict the whole future of the world. That was a sort of thing you thought. The world was a vast machine. And if the world is a machine, then there was no room for God, there was no room for the human soul, there was no room for free choice, what they call free will. So a lot of philosophers, I think all the big philosophers of the last 300 years really built their systems to try and show that some sort of value could be salvaged from this big machine, would still find some ways of being moral and ethical, and Descartes, Leibniz, Kant, and Locke, and all these people. But they didn't get very far. I don't think any of them made a decisive breakthrough, because they all seemed to have believed rather deeply in causality, in rigid causality, that the world, the past determines the future. And once you look at the world that way, it's hopeless to get anything out of it. And I think that today that's changing. I think it's changing a lot.
Where do you see it changing, the way of thinking?
In many ways. First of all, causality is no more rigid. Even Kant said, oh, that was an a priori idea, that you must believe that everything is caused by the past. The past causes the future. And today, quantum theory has upset that completely. I mean, the uncertainty principle means that actually by observing something, you change its nature. If an atom has a certain spin or a certain direction, and it's the way you look at it. The experiment you set up is going to tell you whether it's a wave or a particle. And if you find out its speed, you don't know if you find out its momentum, you don't know its position. If you know its position, you don't know its momentum. And that's not because we don't know it. It's because our actual absorption of knowledge affects the physical world. So once now human knowledge has become an important factor in what happens, that's already a spiritual outlook. So we're not inside a machine. The world is not a machine. The world is almost, you might say, we can direct the world. We can decide what the world's going to be like.
Well, the last 60 seconds, I think, could use repeating from another angle, perhaps.
I mean, that's one point. There are many points from which, for instance, he used to say how nothing can travel quicker than light, right? According to relativity. So they used to ask, how can God know what's happening at the other end of the universe? It would take billions of years, some of the quasars, for the light to reach us. So how would he know what's happening? Now, that used to be a very difficult question. That's no more so difficult. We know today that there are things, funnily enough, which do travel quicker than light. You may not be able to send messages quicker than light, but there's been a lot of experiments in the last 5 years on this thing, on this question of Bell's inequality, it's called. That means if two protons, I don't know, they come out of what's known as a singlet. Now, according to the Pauli exclusion principle, they can't both have the same direction of spin. You know, if one goes clockwise, the others go anti-clockwise. And so now, if you do an experiment and you make this one, and you find out which way it's going, it will affect the other one, however far it is, even if it's on Sirius. Immediately. That's an extraordinary, no one knows how that happens. So, I mean, the question that things can't travel quicker than light is again being...
But do they expect to have an explanation within physics for how that works?
No. The existing physics just breaks down. So you have to make new physics.
Right.
You'll have to make a physics which accommodates all these facts. And these facts each time makes the physical world more flexible and more sensitive, let's say, to spiritual factors. And I think that the world's going to change, and the change is going to come from science. Science is going to introduce the world to totally new concepts of interaction.
Science.
Spiritual exceptions to scientific laws will appear, will begin, if we want to keep an eye out for them.
I think it'll begin with, well, partly it's begun, but I think it'll continue perhaps from study of brain function. I think brain function now points very strongly to the principles of life not being materialistic.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
I've been writing a book on this very question. It's really directed against a school of thought which became popular in Australia. I think it started in Australia and then spread then to America. It's called the body-mind, or the mind-body identity theory. You heard of it?
No, I haven't.
What it claims is that the brain and the mind are the same thing. That the mind is only the brain looked at from inside, sort of a thing. But there's nothing more than matter, you know, only matter exists. There's such a thing as mind being different. As far as I can see, this question's not been properly answered. There have been a lot of books written on it, with attempts to answer it on logical grounds, on semantic grounds, all kinds of funny ways of answering it, but they don't carry much weight. And I don't know, I think I've found a new way of answering this question, which might interest you. It's quite simple. All you have to do is to show that mind can do something which matter can't do. If you can prove that, then you show that it's something different. It's not the same, it's not identical. Now, how do you show it? There's a simple way of showing it. We assume that matter can't be in two places at the same time. I think most people would agree to that. So now all we have to show is that mind can be in two places at the same time. You prove that by just observing how the brain works. If you look at, say, 2 points of light, make it a very simple experiment. You look at 2 points of light and see what happens. And you look through one eye, not to make it too complicated, one eye, you bandage the other eye. Then you get these 2 points of light focusing on the retina. And each place where the light impinges stimulates a different group of nerves, rods and cones, what have you. And the message is transmitted through nerve fibers to the visual cortex of the brain. So the question is, when these two bundles of nerve fibers traveling to the brain, when they get there, do they converge to one point or do they stay separate? They must stay separate, because if they converge, you'd only see one point of light. So they don't converge. So you have two separate places in the brain, each stimulated by a different point of light, right? Now the question is, where am I? I see both points. If I'm at the back of these nerves, which is, let's say, the lights are A and B. So if A is stimulating this group of nerves, and I'm here, then I shouldn't see B. And if I'm at B, I shouldn't see A, but I see A and B. So I'm spread over different parts of the brain. But if I were a physical particle, I couldn't be in two places at the same time. So here we have a substance, whatever you want to call it, which is in two places at the same time.
I don't really
Only in one place at the same time. That's the difference. That's where you have the mind spread. Descartes put everyone wrong. He said that the difference between mind and matter was like this. Matter had extension, and mind had no extension. And the truth is the very opposite of that. Matter has no extension because it's particulate and discrete, and mind has extension. It extends over the whole brain, and you could be looking at things at the same time, hearing things, so that you're at the back of your ear. You could be smelling something, so that you're at the centers of smell, centers of taste, you know. So it's the mind that has spread, and that spread has not so far been recognized by science. So I call that a field of spatial spread. But there are four fields altogether, which I describe in my book. There may be more. Does this interest you?
Yes, yes.
And I'll tell you about the second one. The second one is called field of temporal spread. With one is, I'm told you, it's called the temporal, I call it the temporal field. And that is just because we are spread, as the mind spreads over space, right, in the brain, it spreads over time. That means when you remember something which you did yesterday or a few years ago, are you actually going back in time? Is that past time actually still alive? Or are you reading off a tape? You know, you've got a tape inside and you switch it on, and it's like somebody's voice who was recorded a few years ago, and you listen to it, right? So you may have, it may be that you have engrams or traces in the brain, and you're just reading off the traces. Okay. That's the question. Or do you have true memory? So I say you have true memory. There may be traces in the brain, but you have true memory, because if really you were reading it off a tape or just looking at the engrams, you wouldn't feel that you had done that. You would feel, oh, this is an interesting story I'm reading, you know, Scott or somebody, reading a new novel. But you remember I did it. So there's something more than just reading it off. There's some familiarity with it, right?
You can remember a certain.
So that means that you actually carry with you memory of the past, which means that you are spread over the past. Although in the physical world, the past disappears. The yesterday of this table is no more with us, right? But insofar as we remember the past, we salve the past, and it's not dead, it remains alive with us. So that means that we're spread over time. That yesterday is still there, in a sense. The physical yesterday is gone, but our experienced yesterday is still with us.
Another example of the mind being placed at the same time.
Really only a physical system. And a physical system only exists in the present. Once it goes into the past, it's vanished, right, from existence, doesn't exist anymore. And the future hasn't come yet. So the present is just one very thin slice of space-time. Now, if that were so, a person sees a bowl of boiling water in front of him and says, I don't want to put my hand in the water because I'll get scalded. But think what that means. I won't get scalded because I won't be there. It'll be It'll happen in a minute or two. So the person who gets called is not myself. But I say, no, I'm going to get called. So it means that I travel through time, and the person who's here now is going to be there after so many minutes, right? That shows that we actually do travel through time. So we're in two places at the same time. That means we're in two times in the same place. We're now here, and when we put our hands in the water and get burnt, we're in time, let's say, call it, what's it now?
It's almost past.
5 to 10, and at 10 o'clock we'll also be there. So we're in two times, so we're spread over time.
So it's almost,
Vanished in the past, no more existence. Yesterday's world is not there anymore, but the experience of yesterday's world continues with us. So we seem to drag behind us a whole pile of memories. And the memories are not just in the brain, they're real, true memories. I mean, we go back in time. So you might say, then why sometimes we can recall things and sometimes we can't? Sometimes we remember things and we can't. But that's quite simple to explain, because
there's several theories.
there's a mechanism in the brain which makes us forget. That means it's called inhibition. Inhibition means that we could never act. You couldn't drive a car if you were thinking vividly of what happened yesterday. Instead of having your mind on the road, you'd have your mind on yesterday. So there's a mechanism there that makes you continuously forget. It comes between you and your memories. That's the inhibition. Now, in order to remember, you've got to pierce that inhibition to get back to your true memory. So the mediating mechanism there are these traces in the brain, or engrams, you see, which are laid down probably in molecules. So if you can go to those molecules, it's like a person going to a file. He knows you wrote a letter last year to somebody, but he doesn't remember exactly what you wrote. So he goes to the file, he looks under the name of the man, he takes out the letter, and you read, here's what I wrote. So the letter revives his memory. In the same way, we've got, say, filing cabinets in the brain. But when we go to them, they revive our memory, and we get past the screen of inhibition.
So they're past inhibition, and nothing's ever totally forgotten.
So there's a physical memory and a real memory.
Right.
And the physical memory helps you to get to your real memories. And of course, with older people, the inhibition breaks down. That's why they live in the past. Because that mechanism of forgetting gets weakened, and they're all the time talking about the past. It's because their inhibition is weakened. So that's not...
If I could just ask something.
so important. It's just it's self-awareness. That one part of the mind can look at another part of the mind. All right, that may be something. No, I mean, when you remember something, or you remember what you did, it's like one part of the mind. You look at your memories. There are two things there. One is that you're aware of what you did, and the other is that you can sort of look at yourself doing something. So that means that you don't always have to look at your brain. You can look at yourself also. I'm not sure that this is the least important and the least clear. It's not even absolutely clear to me that we need this third field. But I'm just mentioning it. I think I call field of influx, or something. This is the most complicated thing. It's like this. It's the growing self. But we make a great mistake. We think of ourselves just as our past. That's myself. That's the least important part of myself, because that's what I call precipitated self. That's what you were. But the real self is in the present moment and your choice of what you're going to become. And you're growing all the time into the future. And now the question is, this growing to the future is a very interesting thing, because we get impressions, continuously fresh impressions. And if you were to take a camera and go on exposing it, one exposure after the other, on the same film, one picture would obliterate the other one, right? And so how do you do it? In order that one picture doesn't obliterate, you do it like in a cinematograph camera. You have unexposed film, which unwinds, right? Now, the same thing must happen with us. We have a kind of unexposed field which becomes a substrate to all the things we expose it to our new experiences, right? Because if it were the same one, you know, one impression would have betrayed the other one. And this is the interesting thing that, you know, it's different from the cinematograph film. Because in the cinematograph film, the film is indifferent what you expose it to. You can waste it, you can overexpose it, you can underexpose it. You can take something worthwhile, something useless. Makes no difference to the film. In other words, a film is quite indifferent. But the influx, which enables us to have impressions, has an inner structure. Why has it got an inner structure? Because it has potential. And that means that we can do with it all kinds of things. We can do useless things or useful things. We can fill our time or waste our time. So really, this influx has potential, has infinite potential. Say our brain were twice the size, or our emotions much greater. There would always be enough potential to feed them, right? So that potential, if we had more of it, this is something like what you were saying, if we used more of our brain, it's not so much more of our brain, if we could use more of our potential, we'd see more meaning in life. Because we found out that fields of spread, they unify, they spread in a unity, right? So the more we could see patterns, the more meaning we'd extract from life. For instance, let's take an example. Some people see some ink smudges on a piece of parchment, and they give it to the laboratory to find out what's there. So they give them an analysis of the ink, the parchment, and the materials used and everything. And after a week or two, the man comes and says, I've given you a complete description of what was there. All the materials. So they look at it, they see a list of various chemicals and elements and all that business. And they say, well, that's very good, that gives you the complete picture. But someone there happens to know Chinese, and he notices that this ink are really characters, Chinese characters. And he's able to read it. And he tells them there's a very important message there. And he tells them what the message is, I don't know, there's a bomb ticking under the building, it will go off in 2 or 3 days. What?
Or if you look from it from far back, it'll make some kind of image. Just
I don't know, something. Anyhow, so they realized then that sending the thing to the laboratory, the main document, the message, he hadn't grasped there was a message there, he was just taking the materials. But the world also has a sort of message, a pattern, a meaning, you know. Let's say relationship. Very interesting that this sort of field of influx has a whole hierarchy of purposes. And it has higher purposes and lower purposes. And when a poet is inspired, it's one of these higher levels in this field of influx that inspires him. That's why you find Milton calling on his muse to give him inspiration. And what it means is very interesting purposes. What's a purpose? Now, purpose does very interesting things. If a man wants to think what he did yesterday, he only has to think, what did I do yesterday? And it's like a television screen. In his mind's eye, he sees what he does yesterday. So the purpose of wanting to know what he did yesterday acts like an information retrieval and pulls out all the things he did yesterday and shows him in his mind's eye. Now, that's a very simple thing, but say you meet someone, say, where did I meet him before? And you've met him over the years, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. And again, you say, where did I meet him? And something in your mind will click and show you met him in America once, you met him, I don't know, and so in London another time, you met him in Jerusalem a 3rd time. It'll pick it all out from your store of memory and present you with it. Purposes are marvelous things. Now, that's information retrieval, but purposes can do something much more interesting. They can organize the material of your brain. For instance, say an inventor wants to invent something, I don't know, let's say a machine for grabbing shells out of the sea. He doesn't know how to make it, so he just thinks about it. And all kinds of ideas seem to come together and cluster around this central purpose of his. And he remembers how to make an amphibious machine to go into the sea, and he remembers how to make, I don't know, air pressure things to activate this grabber. and what sort of joints to make, and this and that and the other, all come together. So in other words, his desire to invent something, he just has to think of the thing, and all the relevant material gets organized, and he sees it in front of his mind's eye. So there's something like picking it all out. So purposes are organizing elements. And of course, the higher the purpose, the more important the patterns one sees. And really, moral questions depend on the span of the future you take into consideration. For instance, a person knows it's bad to smoke, but he says, oh, it's very good to smoke because it'll quieten his nerves. That's for the present moment. But he's not thinking after 30 or 40 years he may be in hospital with, lung trouble, or that his smoking might injure members of his family or something like that. He's not taking the future into account. So when you have moral choices, usually it's a question of the length of time you're taking into account. How far into the future you're looking. That's why to serve God really means to work for the utmost future, because our God's called Yod Kevavki. It means the eternal one, the one who will always be there. And if you're serving him, it means you're doing something for the future of this world. Either you're going without for your children or whatever it is, it's the span of future time that you can take it. And that's how values usually are arranged in a hierarchy. Moral questions. And you do good for your children, you keep the atmosphere of the house wholesome, you bring up a generation of good characters and things like that. So the more one works for the future, either of one's people or one's family or whatever it is, or the world, the greater the moral worth of that action is. And so these purposes are all in the influx. So therefore you see that the potential which you can take out of this influx is infinite. And I think it starts at infinity and contracts down into each person according to what they're able to, according to the capacity. So that's really what prayer is, but we'll go into that shortly. Prayer is to try and get, as this influx comes in, it takes on the shape of the human being. Like if you pour out, say for example, blancmange into a mold, it takes on the shape of the mold.
Excuse me.
Or, say you pour out liquid gold, right? And you put it in a mold. Whatever shape the mold has, whether it's a butterfly or a fish or a crown or a it takes on the shape of our character. Whether we can find a general direction in evolution or in any development of living things. And a rather interesting picture emerges from what we've been talking about. That the first thing we see is that living things which have these field of spatial spread or temporal spread. Well, let's take spatial spread. What does it do? It obliterates the here. Because you can't say where you are. If you identify with your right eye, your nose is on your left. If you identify with your left eye, your nose is on your right. So is it to your right or to your left? And if you identify with both eyes, with neither in particular, both to your right and to your left, that means you're not in a particular place. To a certain extent, your here is obliterated, is smudged. You're within your body, let's say. You're not entirely. There is some here, but it's a vague here. Now, let's see what happens with temporal spread. Same thing happens. It's a vague now, it obliterates your now. Because when you think what you did 70 years ago, you can see, I can see myself speaking, or I can see myself eating. So, so your now, although we speak of our present as being special, it's only special because it's very close to the future, and it's the leading edge of our time in which we're going to the present. So that's why it's distinguished. But really, all the nows are roughly the same in our memory. So it obliterates now. And through self-awareness, to a certain extent, we transcend ourselves. And through thinking of the future, we transcend our present. So we see that really what's happening is that fields of spread obliterate here and now and self. So the question is, now this would answer a very interesting question. One often asks a question and never has a proper answer. According to Darwin, the reason for evolution is to survival of the fittest. But you can ask a simple question. An amoeba, there are millions and millions of amoeba in a cubic foot of air, right? Or bacteria. And by becoming an elephant, there may be only 100 or 200 or 300,000 elephants in the world. So how have the chances of survival improved? It's really a very difficult question.
Well, what do the biologists say about that question?
I've never seen it properly discussed. I don't think we have an answer for it. It doesn't make sense. But now, in the light of what we've said, we can give an answer. Really what's urging living things upwards is not so much to survive, because they survive very well as low organisms, as bacteria or as amoeba or what have you, protists. But really what's making them develop is that they want to embody more and more of this field of influx in themselves. Because the field of influx obliterates the here and the now. So they're transcending, in other words, this narrow framework, material framework in which they find themselves. Now, if that's the case, then we can extrapolate to the future. We can say the urge is continuously for living things to transcend more and more the shackles of their localization or the narrow confines in which they find themselves. And through the mind developing, your here and your now get more and more obliterated. Because if you're working for the future, then you're not working for the present. It doesn't matter if the future comes or doesn't come, but the fact that you are serving a purpose, which is future, right? That your ideal is the future means that you're out of the present. And so that if you take this whole series and you say, what's the last term of this series? Not really the last term. The series hasn't got a last term. No infinite series has a last term. But you can say, what is the limit to which the series points, right? So the limit would be God, because God completely, with him there's no here and no now. He fills the universe, and so he has no here, and all past time, he remembers all past time, and he judges everything in relation to the future. So he's not now, and so that's really what it means. In order to embody in ourselves more of this influx, that's why we come to God, to show us a higher and a better way. That's why Yirmiyah says, "Amdu aderachim v'sha'alu l'ntivot olam eze derech hatov u'chuba." Stand on the crossways and see which way is the eternal way, because some are only for the present, some are till tomorrow, some are till next month, and some are eternal ways, and really for the permanent good of the universe.
Human beings have within them the very, very 100% power of working toward the future, or is it become
with God's help? They've got to get from the influx and inspiration.
Is that expected of us, though? I mean, aren't we supposed to have a good time here and worry about enjoying ourselves?
That's living in the present.
But we're not. All the things that we have around us aren't for our enjoyment.
If you only live in the present, you'll make a very, very shabby future. I mean, people who, for instance, who are loose morally and contract diseases and get children who are, without legs or without hands and all things. Isn't that a terrible thing to do? So if you don't think of the future, you're laying great misery for future generations, and a person can never rest quietly if he knows he's done evil to somebody else.
Rabbi, when you plant a tree for the future, you plant it so you can enjoy it one day in the future. When that day comes in the future, it's going to become the present. So in 20 years, when the tree grows and you say, do I want to enjoy it? That day will be the present day. I should enjoy it that day.
But sometimes a tree takes 70 years to bear fruit.
Okay.
And you'll never see it in your lifetime. You're doing it for your children or children's children.
But that day, when the fruit is born, when the fruit is bare, that'll be present for them. Shouldn't they enjoy that present?
Of course you should enjoy so long. You should enjoy the present. You've got to enjoy, you've got to live to, you've got to eat to live. But the point is that everything has a certain measure. There's a measure in which if you want to continue to live till tomorrow, you've got to eat. So that's for tomorrow. And there are other things for day after tomorrow and other things for
No,
next.
I'm not talking about just eating the fruit. I'm talking about just sitting there and admiring the beauty of the tree instead of going out immediately and making another tree. Admiring and loving the future instead of constantly thinking about, admiring the present instead of constantly thinking about the future.
Well, it depends. I mean, to a certain extent that's good because if you look at the beauty of the tree, you may see how wonderful God's works are and come closer to God and then work for a greater future, you know. But you can't stop at that. That's the trouble with the meditation people. They say, oh, they meditate on this bottle, and after half an hour, after doing it every day for a week or two, they say, I and the bottle are the same. No, everything is the same. We're all one. That's useless. That's why they tolerate caste in India. The unity we're interested in is to make unity, not just to know that we're all one. To bring unity where there's discord. To make peace between one man and the other, to be kind, to be good, to be just, to help people, right? That's bringing an active unity, not just saying everything is one. So if you meditate for too long, it becomes counterproductive.
Is the influx we use is the same for everybody? It's the one pool?
It's the same influx, goes into an amoeba, it's going to
So in theory, every person could reach out and get that same thing. No, what makes us different one from the other if we all draw from that one influx?
Because it's infinite and each one gets a different combination.
What makes that different?
Two artists have exactly the same paint box they buy the same sort of paint box which has 20 colors from the shop. But each one produces a totally different picture. It's the way he combines the elements which is good. It's what we take out of this infinite thing. And every tree takes a different thing. Why are there so many millions of shapes of leaves, right? And thousands of shapes of leaves, right? You can't believe that the environment, there aren't so many environments that each environment produces a different shaped leaf. But these are different harmonious wholes, different combinations. Or you have an octave and you can produce thousands of different songs, right? Melodies with the same notes on them.
I'm trying to get is it we drink it from the same bottle? Is it because each one is taking what he can?
Yeah.
What is making me and Rabbi Shammai different? Is it something that was built in us, or is it how much I tried, how much he tried? Is it something that God decided that each person should draw a different part of that pool, or is it?
Well, it's many of those things combined. Partly, you've got a different body from him. Secondly, you've got a different background from him. And you start off from a different point of view. No people can see the same world. Each person sees a different world. Number one. And number two, it also depends on your efforts. On your effort, how well you use your time, what you do with it. So it depends on lots of things. Now the interesting thing is this, that we said purposes organize elements inside us. Now there's another question. Those purposes are within our field of thought. Now say we could reach out to a purpose that's right outside our ego. Would that purpose be able to organize things which are outside ourselves? What? Right. For instance, I said a poet wants to write poetry. So he thinks in terms of wanting to write poetry, and all the words in his vocabulary get ordered, let us say, according to meter and rhyme, nice phrases come into his mind and he's inspired. But nothing from outside himself. He doesn't get to know words which he'd never heard before. Words which he doesn't know. But, so those things are within the control of his. But now say he were to reach out to some purpose that's right outside himself, completely selfless. He gets to a selfless level, where he doesn't count at all. What I call the non-ego. Would the non-ego be able to organize elements also outside himself? Since he reaches to a point which is outside himself. Follow? No.
Yeah,
what I mean is like this.
So that it would be totally, there's no good for you, just to do it, just
Yeah.
someone else.
Yeah. Now, would that be able to? I say yes, it would be able to. That's the whole idea of prayer. Because when if we touch, if we do things for the sake of the Almighty, for Him, not for ourselves, then He organizes elements in the world to help us.
But still, I don't think God needs
I don't
my
believe
prayer.
the soul is part of God. I think that's not a good idea. All right, we won't discuss
It's another
that.
thing.
Right.
But I'm not praying for God.
We want to do
God
His
can
will.
survive without
Well, I
my
think
prayer.
say He tells us to do something for the good of the next generation, from which we know we get no benefit, right? What I mean is, if it's a selfless prayer, which goes very high, which goes to a very high purpose, and that purpose will be able to organize elements in our life which are also beyond our control. Because since the field of influx is infinite at its source, so it's going out to everything, but only a little comes into us. But if we get out of ourselves to the point at which it's infinite, it can organize things beyond ourselves. So that when the Jews went to the Dead Sea, God parted the sea, right? Because they called to Him. So He's above what. So they were outside. They were going beyond what their abilities and their powers could do. But as they came to a level which is outside themselves, that level controls much more, controls the whole world. So that's why very often when one prays, things happen which wouldn't have happened ordinarily. We call that a miracle, because it didn't happen through our own powers, our direct powers. So what one sees is that really the laws of the Torah are called these are eternal laws for the good of our future and our children's children. That's really the whole aim of the laws of the Torah, so that we don't rob future generations what belongs to them.
How does one know when he reaches that level where he can reach far?
No, it's all. We can only try to purify our intention. You can never be sure. You can only try. But sometimes by trying hard, you break through the barrier. And then you have a feeling that it was a selfless action. But Rabbi says even if we have a few selfless actions in life, we gain immortality. But anyhow, that's a general idea of what the laws of the Torah are. That we get immortal in two senses, both in this world and in the next. In this world, because we've done things which help this world on, and which will lay foundations for our children and children's children. And in the spiritual sense, we get immortality because, if we do selfless things, then we no more identify with our body. We identify more with the levels of the field of influx, and then we can sort of leap over to something which is more permanent in our bodies.
You say that scientists are one of the highest spiritual ones, that they have a lot of spiritual power, and through them, not spiritual power, but we can find, they're the ones who usually...
No, I'm sorry, I know, I understand. I didn't really mean that. I don't mean that scientists are a bit spiritual. I don't think they are. And but what I meant was, I said they were the thinking people today.
You give a lot of respect to science.
So, no, I don't know about a lot of respect. No, I don't have a lot of respect, because they're making bombs and all kinds of awful, terrible things, and poison gases and whatnot, and infectious things and all terrible things they're doing. I didn't really mean that. All I meant was that they are the growing point of humanity thinking. So I thought that in their thinking, which is not a bit spiritual, like someone digging in a garden, but you know that he's going to find a treasure there. But he doesn't know, he's not aware of it. All I think is that these people are going to suddenly hit upon a spiritual message. Not that they're spiritual people, but they're going to come across a spiritual message.
So they don't have no way out.
Well,
They will have no
Well,
explanation.
but they see, yeah, exactly. Not only they have no explanation, they will see that the world's put together in a spiritual way. It's not put together in a clockwork. It's not a piece of clockwork. The real basis of the world is spiritual. It's not a machine. The world is not a machine. And that's what I think they've discovered.
Those quote-unquote picking on things or crazy things that people say, do you help the world? But I mean, it's some mitzvot that don't seem to have any bearing on helping the world.
No, every Muslim is there to purify your intention. For instance, you put on the tefillin, right? It's in order that you could put your attention is wandering all the time. It's a method of concentrating your attention. So you need all those props, right? I mean, how do you help the world? By putting on your shoes in the morning. If you didn't have shoes, you didn't in your feet and then you lie in bed for a few days. So lacing up your shoes may look very unimportant, but it's really very important for the world that you should be well shod and get to your place of work in the morning.
But putting on tefillin is helping yourself maybe spiritually, then how does it help the world? How does
It
it make
reminds
this
you of your
world?
duties because it said Vashidandan Levanecha. So most people neglect the education of their children. So if you think of Vashidan Tefillin, Shema says Vashidandan Levanecha, to teach your children, you're more likely to remember. For instance, I mean, you know,
Like true.
everything, each thing is to teach you something. Kashrut is the same sort of thing, to prevent us becoming gluttons, and to prevent us eating with the goyim.
So then you might have the question, why not just have a simple act instead of having a very intricate network of small actions surrounding that most people don't see the relevance to?
Well, look, Paul tried the experiment. He thought he could do it all with intention. He said the yoke of the law makes him sin. So the result was he produced an ugly like Christianity. You've got the experiment in front of you, 2,000-year experiment. Doesn't work.
Maybe you should,
What is that?
can you comment on that?
I heard an explanation that, like, first of all, Mashiach ben Yosef will come, and then Mashiach ben Rabbi. And Mashiach ben Yosef is the materialistic world. Yosef was in charge of the material in Egypt, and then David was the spiritual.
Right.
But then, I don't know where it's written that Mashiach ben Yosef will not come. That
He'll be killed.
he'll be killed. Right. Is there something like Magashi Kesef or something? Kesef something? Explanations about Mashiach ben Yosef will be the person who will come to Umot HaUlam, Tzarfat, and all the big nations, and will speak about the country.
Yeah.
To the this was, I think, written in the 16th century.
I don't know, Rabbi Yehuda El-Qamah, he was a Sephardi rabbi in Yugoslavia. And he, I think, was one of the first who said that the Jews must make an effort to get their country, the effort of their own. And he called that Mashiach ben Yosef.
Yeah.
He said, this is a period of Mashiach ben Yosef. Yosef went to Paro, and he said, let my brothers in.
Right.
And we must go to the nations of the world and get permission to populate this country.
Okay.
And that was it. And they say Herzl, as a young boy, used to hear
I
him.
wanted to ask.
And that somehow was dormant in his subconscious, and then suddenly he remembered it.
So can we say that now we're in the period of Mashiach ben Yosef because we're very materialistic now? That
I
means
think so.
we're on our way to Mashiach ben Yosef.
Yeah, it could be. I'm not a great believer in trying to predict, but I think in general terms one can say that, definitely. We must believe that a spiritual future is waiting for us. We can't think that the materialistic, empty life can possibly be the destiny of the human race.
We should rely on the spiritual part for the future, or try to combine it in with the materialistic part right now.
I don't understand that question.
You said that the spiritual life awaits us,
Yeah.
and we're right now the
Awaits
material.
humanity, but each person must, of course, become spiritual himself. It's only the humanity is made of individuals.
We shouldn't be concerned of combining the two together, or material should be completely out of the picture.
No, nothing should be completely out. The Torah doesn't like extremes. No, we should live a natural life, but put the stress on spiritual values. Look at the world. Look at the world from a spiritual point of view. Try and do good while we're passing through. And see what one could do with that as well.
So Rabbi, do you think that for a young man or woman to enter the sciences with an open, objective mind, expecting to find that, get on this cutting edge, so to speak, like it almost could have a sacred mission to that type of work, to the world?
Depends on what intention.
I was saying, if they have this intention, to look for the horizon where the spiritual will sort of...
Why not? I mean, the rabbis of the Middle Ages all said one should study nature. Now in Rosh Chodesh we read Balachei Nafshi, which is nothing but a paean to God's wonderful, natural.
But when you say that things are going to come out of science, but science itself is only based on revolutions after revolutions, and one theory lasts only until it's disproven. So how can we base any type of concrete future on revolution of theory that may just be knocked out by the next one that comes along?
I agree with you. I don't think science in its present state is at all is a great thing to build on. We couldn't. But I just said, because they were asking how I visualize Mashiach, I visualize that science will see one after the other of its so-called immutable laws having exceptions and breaking down, and that ultimately a spiritual content of the universe will be found. I think I'm talking about the future, I wasn't talking about the present. I don't say you can build your emunah entirely on, you can't on science, because science is full of very bad gaps, although people don't notice it. I mean, really bad gaps.
Will the Messiah come and then all people will come to Israel, or will all people come to Israel and then the Messiah will come?
No. First they go, it's like, I mean, now we say, we start coming to Israel, then we get our own institutions, then we have Allah Sadiqim, that the righteous get stronger in their influence, and then we have Shkon, and then we have
All that has to happen before this.
well, it looks like it. I mean, it looks like it from the Gemara and Megillah. But, yeah, the way we're seeing it developing today.
Will that happen?
Hmm?
Will that happen?
Well, I don't believe in predicting it. It always depends on our choices. One must always feel that the destiny of one's people are in the individual's own hands. One person can change our destiny. Each person is responsible. Not a question of what will happen. We're not chaff, we're not straws floating on a river. We've got to steer our course. Depends on the strength of our character.
Do you believe that there will be total peace between people?
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe there can be total peace between people?
Yeah,
between
absolutely.
all people?
Even our people.
It seems, but there always seems like there's someone, a small group, even if it's 5% and 1%, that are always against the rest of the percent. And I don't know, even if you can change 99%, which I don't know if it could happen, the 1% seems like it's always there, like this American army.
It's very difficult for a 1% to wreck if the other people are really inwardly peaceful, They can't do anything, they can't do much. It's like a doctor who doesn't get excited when a patient, psychotic patient gets terribly excited and he remains calm. It has a calming effect.
Right.
So people remain calm, and then these queer, violent, wild people, they'll be finding that there's no reaction, because they want a reaction all the time. They want to make themselves important, noticed, and all that. People let them, leave them alone. They're not cutting a figure. Once this mind spreads over space, it's spread. Oh, by the way, this gives you a very good explanation of why a computer and a person are totally different things. Because that's a favorite question in modern science. That a computer can do things which a human being can't. It can play chess, it can calculate things which would take a man a lifetime to do. A computer can do it an hour or two. For instance, extracting a prime factor from a very big number.
But actually, a human can do what a computer.
What's that?
A human can do what a computer can do if it was at a higher level of using the brain. It's not that the computer actually can do more than the human, because it was the human who made the computer. It's just if the man has, if we men or women can use not only 1/10 of our brain and use more of our brain, we can work just as quickly as the computer. It's not that we don't have it.
How do you know that? I mean, it may be so. I doubt it very much. For instance, if you wanted to work
Well,
out
we create things that we
10 or 12 Mersenne numbers, take your lifetime.
Even if we use our entire capacity, and we use such a little, supposedly such a little tiny part of our brain.
Yeah. But it depends what the exercise is. If it's like extracting roots and things like that, it's a technical thing, right?
Right.
Maybe, because geniuses, mathematical geniuses have been able to do extraordinary things. No one knows really what the limits of what the brain can do. Anyhow, as the brain is today, there are things which a computer seems to be able to do much faster, right? In a millionth part of the time would take a man. So the question is, what's the difference between a brain and a computer? So some people say, oh, computer has to be programmed, things like that. But then maybe you would say the brain needs programmed, like chromosomes and genes. But the answer is obvious, follows from what we said before, that really the computer cannot add 1 and 1 to make 2. Because what does adding mean? Adding means that you hold two things in a field, you call that 2. But the computer never holds anything in a field. And the 2 which it shows you, when you put 1 and 1 and it gives you 2, these are arbitrary signs which you interpret as 2. But to the machine means nothing. It's like reading off a ruler and saying this is 1 inch, 2 inches, and reading off 2 and saying, look, the ruler's added 1 and 1. But the ruler never moved, the ruler was passive all the time. So that really, the simplest addition cannot be done by a computer, if you know what addition means. But what we do is we degrade our thoughts into mechanical messages, and we regrade them up, we interpret them, and we get the answer. But the real thinking is done by our minds, it's not done by the computer. There's no thinking going on there.
Just to interject, you know, I saw something recently, they want to teach computers to cry when certain things happen, and to let other things happen, and I said they'll be just like human beings then. And
But this is,
I mean, there are
people,
people,
the idolaters.
there are
This
people
is modern
who
idolatry.
think, right, they think they're creating human beings.
But that's
Maybe
not
it's
a problem.
not.
So that's the first